This Intro to Library Workflows session is designed to provide an overview of what happens when instructors start to submit their lists. We'll be focusing on what happens inside of Alma and the types of things that the library might do to process these different reading lists. Some of this will probably be a repeat of information that you already know, especially if you're used to working with course reserves in Alma, but some of it will also be new. I'll move through this somewhat quickly, but the idea is that you'll have some of this background information so that as you're thinking about developing your library workflows, you'll have a better understanding of the types of things that you can do with reading lists and the types of things that you may want to consider as you're processing these lists for your own library. We'll mostly be looking at Alma today, but I do also want to take a look at this reading list in the Leganto view first. This is the list that we'll be processing, and I'm logged in as the instructor right now. There's a few things that I want to point out on the instructor view because we'll look at this in Alma. The first thing that I want to point out is that we do have a comment here in the library discussion. So Henry Simpson is our instructor, and he's added this comment for the library. And I also want to point out that in one of these citations, there's also a comment from the instructor. Here you can see on this book there's a comment to scan chapter 3. So we'll look at both of these comments from the library perspective so you can see where those come in and what they look like as you're processing these different resources. But with that, we'll say that the instructor is finished working on this list and they're going to send it to the library for review. The library can actually see the reading list before it is sent to the library. What happens is it changes the status of the reading list and it triggers a new task in the task list here. I'm going to talk about the tasks a little bit before we actually dive into the workflows so that this will be familiar to you. The ones that I want to really focus on are the ones that would require some sort of attention on our part. Here we can see alerts for lists that have new notes. These are notes from the instructor in that library discussion. So when there are notes at the list level, we can see those come in as a task here. The ones that are say being prepared, these are lists that the instructor is still working on, so we don't need to worry about processing those items yet. When the instructor submits the list to the library, it triggers this ready for processing status. So these are reading lists that the instructor has finished working on and sent to the library. So that's where we're going to pick up our workflow today. Before we do that, I also want to talk about some of the tasks that are in the citation task list. There are citations that have new files, so if the instructor uploads files, there's an alert that's added to that particular citation. Some libraries will review these files for copyright or for accessibility, so you can very quickly and easily find those citations that have uploaded files. You can also see alerts about citations that have new notes, both ones that are assigned to me, lists that are assigned to me, or those that are unassigned. This is the library discussion, but at the citation level. So when there's a note on a specific item or specific citation, we'll see the alert here. Again, we can see citations that are ready for processing, which are the ones that we're going to focus on at the library, but you can also see how many are in the process of being prepared by the instructors, meaning instructors are working on those lists, but they're not ready for us yet. So here again, we'll focus on the tasks for ready for processing. From a workflow perspective, the library will want to pick up these reading lists or these citations that are ready for processing and work their way through them. You can work at either the reading list level or the citation level. I'll talk a little bit about both of the options so you'll be able to understand a little bit more about this workflow and get an idea of which method may work better for your library. I'm going to start by going into the reading lists that are ready for processing. I think for many libraries who are switching to Leganto, this tends to be the way that you think about the process of working with course materials. They tend to come in course by course as you get this information from instructors. So I often think this is the most familiar way to work with course materials. So I'm going to start here and talk about some of the options that are available, but I will also talk about working through these citation tasks as kind of an alternative to the list by list approach. So let's go into the unassigned ready for processing queue. These are all of the reading lists where the instructor has sent the list to the library and nobody has picked them up yet. So by default, they come into this unassigned queue. I want to talk about this screen a little bit while we're here. So a couple things to be aware of if you're not already aware of this is that you can customize these task lists so you can control the fields that display in these task lists. There's a number of fields that are turned on by default, and there's also a number of fields that are turned off by default. You may have different preferences in terms of what you want to see in your reading list task list. I tend to encourage libraries to include the course code as one of the fields that comes in. This is also a shift when if you're used to working with reading lists in Alma. When you create those lists pre-Leganto, the course code or the reading list code, excuse me, is a number that you fill in manually, whereas with Leganto, this is a number that's created automatically. So it is just a string of numbers and doesn't tend to mean anything to most humans. So the course code tends to be a nice way to identify the details of the course for this particular reading list. So that's a nice one to add. You do have the option to hide the course code or to hide any of these other fields, and you may also find that some of these additional options are helpful to you as you start to work with reading lists. So keep that in mind as you're working through this. If you think it'd be nice to have more information, it'd be nice to have less information, those are probably fields that you can include in this. And then of course you can customize this to move these things around as well. The other thing I want to mention while we're on this task list is just like all task lists in Alma, here we can see things that are unassigned, reading lists that are unassigned, those that are assigned to me. I can see all of the reading lists, and as a reading list manager, you can also see lists that are assigned to others. These reading lists, like I said, do come in unassigned by default. You have the option to assign them to specific people or to assign them to yourself. I can select the checkbox here. I could select multiple checkboxes here if I needed to, and I can go in and assign them to a specific person. So some libraries will do that. They'll go through and say, you know, I do all of the ones from the business and the history department, so I'll assign those lists to myself. Some libraries have more of a first come, first serve model. So here you can see one of the options is the date that the instructor sent this list for review. So you can work in that way instead if you prefer. Reading lists will automatically assign to you as you start working on them. So they'll move from the unassigned queue to our specific queue. This is the one that we just sent, this network analysis one, so we'll take a look at that now and work our way through this reading list. We can go into the action menu here and click on Work On. You can also click on the course code here, or I'm sorry, the reading list code, which will open up the list as well. And now we can see all of the citations that the instructor has added to this particular reading list. So we're looking at this, of course, from the Alma perspective. Before we dig into that, there's a few sort of housekeeping things that I want to mention as we're looking at this screen. The first thing that I want to point out is that there is a View in Leganto option, so we can always open up this same reading list in the Leganto view. If you ever need to see what that looks like, you can very easily do that and get to all of the citations as they appear in Leganto. So that's always an option at the list level. There's also a View in Leganto option for any of the citations as well, if you ever are in a situation where you need to see that. Also, we have some information about the course here, so we can see the details of the course that this particular list is linked to. I'm going to go ahead and just collapse this right pane so that we have a little bit more room here. You can also see the tabs across the top of the list. So the Citations tab is the one that we're going to spend the most time on today. These are all of the citations on the reading list. We can also see the course or the courses that this particular list is linked to. This is clickable, the course code, so if we need to navigate over to the course record for any reason, we can do that. If for some reason we needed to change the course association or add new courses, we can do that as well from here. You can see the owners of the reading list. These are the people who have permission to work on this reading list, not including library staff or people with the Leganto course operator role who can work on any reading lists. These are specifically the instructors of this course or people who have been added as designated collaborators for the list. So again, if we ever needed to confirm that information, we can see it here in the Owners tab. There's also a Notes tab, and here you can see that instructor note. So this is the comment that the instructor added to the list in Leganto. Please paste 2 books on course reserves, so we can see that information here. We can also add notes if we need to. I can go in and put a note back to the instructor, which they'll be able to see in the Leganto screens, or we can have internal library notes. So if you ever need to keep track of any information about this list that's really just for the library purposes, you can add that in as a list note. And then finally, there's a Recent Changes tab where you can see this information if you ever need to. Let's go back to the Citations tab, and we'll now pick this up and look at it from the perspective of the person who's processing this reading list and making sure that students will have access to all of these course materials. The library can see all of the citations on the reading list. In this case, there are 19 citations on this list. It does include all different types of resources. So we have book chapters, we have books, we have articles. This one probably has some websites and videos and things like that on the list as well. So we include all of these different types of resources in the list that the library can see. You have options to expand your inventory or collapse your inventory depending on your personal preferences for how these things will display. And you also have the gear icon here to adjust the fields that display and the order that these fields display. So again, you can always customize the way that your particular view looks when you're working on reading lists. There's 2 fields that I want to spend a little bit of time talking about in this session. The first one is the request status. So as different types of resources are added to reading lists, they will be either automatically marked as complete or not. And this is dependent on your library workflows and how you customize the system to flag certain types of resources. So it really depends on what you do in your library, the types of things that you do to support course materials or to make those course materials available to students. Out of the box, if you don't make any changes to the configurations, the things that are flagged for library processing include physical items. So we can see here this physical item is marked as ready for processing. Uploaded files will be marked as ready for processing, and also things that don't have any inventory. This is not including things like websites where the student is meant to access that resource through the website. It's specifically things where there is no access point available for students. So those will also be flagged for library review. This is something that you can customize. There's a configuration menu, the Course Reserve Automatic Statuses configuration menu. We'll talk about this more in the session on the library configurations, but this is where you can customize this to flag the different types of resources that require library review. So the request status is the first piece that we'll use to help us process this reading list. And then the second piece is the resource locate status. There's a couple of different things that can potentially display in this field. Resource located indicates that we have library inventory for this particular resource and it's linked up with the citation. So here we can see our electronic inventory is linked up to this citation. Our physical inventory is linked up to this citation. So that means, that's what the resource locate means. It may also be that it's located through the link resolver. So this article here is an example of that. We have this available. We found that through the link resolver and it says resource located. There are many other things, like I said, that this field could read. I'll just open this up so that you can see some of the options. Information incomplete, locate failed. We'll look at a few of these. I have some examples that are set up to show us what a few of these mean, but resource locate indicates that it is actually located in the library collections. So here, now we have a list of 19 different citations. That doesn't mean that the library needs to go through and actually look at all of these different citations. That's where this request status comes into play. And there are different filters at the top of the list to help us narrow down the work to focus on the things that we need to focus on. Citation status is one of the filtering options. I tend to start with this. I like starting with the ones that are not already complete, so you can essentially see everything else. Everything that hasn't already been finished or marked as complete will now show up in this list. You can see now we have 5. So there are 5 citations on this list that we need to take a look at. You can also filter by other things. You can filter by specific resource locate statuses or specific material types. Some libraries make heavy use of tags, so it may be that we want to start with the essential readings first and focus on those to make sure that students will have access, and then from there work our way through the rest. So that's something that you can do as well. It really depends on, again, the types of things that you do with these course materials or the way that you present the tool to instructors. We'll just work through this list in order here, and I'll talk about how we might handle some of these different citations here. So the first one is a physical item. I can see our physical availability here. I can see that this is resource located. And now from here, we'll decide what we want to do with this particular resource. That may depend on what you do with course materials, with physical items. We integrate with Alma workflows to take care of the process of preparing these resources and getting them ready for the start of the term. I'm going to go in first to the Manage Fulfillment options here and talk about the options that are available. So now we can see any inventory that we have for this particular item, electronic, digital, and physical, as well as any active requests for this particular resource, and then I can place a request on this. Here is where I can go to place a digitization request if you need to do that. Maybe we actually only need a particular chapter of this item. We can do the digitization request, or we can move this item either permanently or temporarily. Many libraries will move things temporarily to a short-term loan location or the course reserve stacks, so we can use this to start that process. In our demo site here, we'll move this to the main library and specifically to our reserves location. The due back date here is inherited by the end date of the course. So at the end of the term, this will trigger a task in the Alma task list in the pick from shelf list to route this item back to its permanent location. So that's the due back date. We can change that if we need to. We can remove that as well if you prefer not to have that happen automatically. You can also specify the number of copies that you would like to bring in. If you have more than one copy, you could be able to fill that information in as well. What we're going to do when we submit this request is actually trigger a pick from shelf request. So for the people who monitor the pick from shelf list for this location, my main library general location, they'll see a new pick from shelf request. They'll go to the stacks and pull this item, and Alma will route it over to our course reserves location. So now we can see the item is still sitting in the general location, but I have a new alert that the citation move request is in process. As you do things to work on these citations, alerts like this will be automatically added. So we'll be able to see what's going on. If a couple days from now I come to take a look at this, I'll be able to understand when this request was submitted and who submitted it, and potentially identify that there may be a problem with this particular item. Now we can take a look at the second one here. I should point out that you can do these move requests in bulk. So these are both physical items. I could select both of these resources and do place request. So you can work in bulk for all of your physical items here. I kept this separate on purpose because I want to look at them in a slightly different way. I want to point out here that we have an alert that this has a new note. This is again the note from the instructor, but this one's at the citation level. So here we can see a comment asking us to scan chapter 3. There's a number of different ways that libraries can use digitization workflows with Leganto. I'm not going to go into too much detail in this session, but I do want to talk at a very high level about some of the options that are available. First, you can use the digitization workflows that exist in Alma for handling that digitization process as a dedicated workflow. This will trigger a task in the Alma task list. It can potentially include copyright approval workflows as well. If you have this configured to work, instructors can submit digitization requests in the Leganto interface. The library can submit digitization requests here under the Manage Fulfillment options. That was one of the other options when we did place a request, is a digitization request. So here here we can fill in the details of that digitization request, and then this would trigger a task to both pull this item off of the shelf and then have it digitized. So there is a dedicated workflow that Alma supports for digitization. Some libraries don't use that workflow. Instead, me as the course reserves librarian, I am the one who's going to go pull this off of the stacks and scan that item. So you can also have a more informal workflow that's something more like what we see here, where the instructors added in just a comment to ask us to scan chapter 3. We would go and get this book off of the shelf and scan chapter 3. And then if I click on edit here, I can actually go in and upload the file. So this has all of the citation details, but scrolling down, there's a section here where we can upload a file. So I can click on add file and put in our chapter 3 that we have just scanned and add that to this particular course. So there's some flexibility in terms of how you can handle these digitization workflows. It really depends quite a bit on your staffing and how you have Alma configured or how you'd like to have Alma configured. But in this case, I have now uploaded chapter 3 for this particular citation. I could also move this to our course reserve stacks if that's something that you do. You may recall that my instructor note here at the list level asked us to move both of these books to course reserves, so we could do that at the instructor's request. That would be exactly the same as what we just did for the other one. You can also see here an alert that this is being used in other lists or other courses. I can take a look at this and understand how this item is used across different courses. I can see the details of the other courses that are using this particular item, including the number of students enrolled in that course, and also see the total information. So this is great, especially if you are, looking at things like how many copies to move to the course reserves location, or do we need to purchase additional copies. You can always see that extra information about this particular citation. I'm going to go ahead and just set this one as complete. In this case, we've uploaded the file, and we'll say that we're finished with this, and that will take it off of the list that we're working on. Again, I'm filtered to all of the ones that are not already complete. So that's really the idea with processing these citations, is you'll work through them in whatever order works best for you, and then track your progress as you go to set these as complete when they're ready for students to use. The next one here is also a book. We can see in this case it says no resources located. What this means is that the library doesn't have inventory for this particular resource. So from here, we can, what we do depends on what your library does for this type of thing, but this will be something to think about as you roll out Leganto on your campus. How do you want to handle resources that the library doesn't have? It's quite likely that these resources will appear in reading lists to at least some degree because of the way that instructors build those lists. So this is something that might have been added using the Cite It tool. It might have been added using the create form where instructors can create citations, but in this case we don't have inventory for this. We can integrate with acquisitions workflows. So if you do purchase course materials, I could do a purchase request for this particular resource. This is something that needs to be enabled by Ex Libris. If you want course reserves staff to be able to submit these purchase requests, that's something that Ex Libris can turn on for you. Just let us know. In this case, it will actually create a purchase request for our acquisition staff as something to review. It pulls in the information about the citation here, as well as some additional details. I am Tucker Simpson, so that's the person who's requesting this particular purchase, and you can see it also includes some of the course information as well. And if you do use tags to indicate essential readings or other things, the tag information will come in also. It is possible to set this up so that purchase requests are created automatically. You can set up rules that will trigger purchases in particular situations. So things like if the library doesn't already have inventory for this and it was tagged as essential, we want to trigger a purchase request. That's something that you can do, or it can be something that's submitted more manually. So now that I submitted that purchase request, you can see that there's a new alert here, again tracking the progress. When this request is either approved or declined, I'll be able to see that information as well. So now I'm just waiting for my acquisition staff to review this. It may be that you decide not to purchase these course materials. In some other options that would be available would be, one, to just leave this on the Leganto list. Maybe we could add in a note to point students to a particular place where they should purchase this this item. You can add in a link to the bookstore if that's where students are supposed to go to purchase this resource. You could also add a note to the instructor if you'd like to talk to them about it. I'm going to click on Edit here and just point out where we can do some of these things. Again, we can go into the Notes tab here if we wanted to add a note for the instructor, maybe to let them know that this is something the library doesn't have, and ask them if they'd like us to suggest something else or another option there. So we can do that. We can also go back over to the citation details. And down at the bottom, we could put in a note. This would be a note that would display to students. So if we wanted to, add a particular comment for students about how they're going to access this resource, the library can do that, or the instructor can do that in Leganto. The other thing to be aware of is this source field here. This will actually be a link that points to a resource. So if students are going to purchase this item from the bookstore, we could put a link right here to that bookstore item. So it would take students directly to this resource on the campus bookstore. Moving down on our list, the next one is number 3 here. This one, the status is ready for processing, and the resource locate status is information incomplete. What this means is that there isn't enough information in the citation to check this against our library inventory. This is configurable in terms of the fields that are used to make this check, but out of the box it is a combination of the title and the ISBN. For these other book citations up here, you can see the ISBN is included, whereas this one here we only have the title and the author and the year. So we don't have enough information to run that resource locate in order to find the library inventory for this resource. I may go in, let me click on the edit menu here. It may be that I need to add a note to the instructor to ask them to fill in some additional details. In this case, we do actually have quite a bit of information about this, so it's quite possible that I could use this to find the additional details, which is what I did in this case. I looked this up online and I found the ISBN for this item, and I can go ahead and just add this to the citation details and save those changes. You can fill in more information here, but something to be aware of is that when you update one of those fields that triggers or that's used in a resource locate, like I said, ISBN and title are the fields out of the box, it asks you if you want to run a new resource locate. So it will now check against our inventory. Because I updated this field, it will check against our library inventory and see if we have anything that matches the metadata that I have in here now. There may be situations where you don't want to run the resource locate, where maybe your Alma record has different information than you want to have on your citation record. That's always an option, but in this case I am looking for library inventory, so I'm going to go ahead and do save and run, which will run that resource locate job. I have an alert here that the citation was successfully located. It actually took it off of the list here because I've previously filtered this down to only items that are in this ready for processing status. Let me expand this out so that we can see what's happened with this particular citation. It was this one here, Social Network Analysis with Applications. This was the one that we just located, and you can see that it linked it up with our electronic inventory. We have configured our demo site here to automatically complete citations where the library has electronic inventory. So when the resource locate job found this electronic inventory, it linked it up with this inventory, it added additional metadata to the record here, and it also automatically marked this citation as complete. Now let's go back to our filtered version of this list. So I'm going to go again to all of the ones that are in not complete status. We're making good progress working our way through this list, and we only have one left at the bottom here that we haven't looked at yet. So I just want to talk about what we can see for this one. Here we have the no resources located, meaning there is no library inventory for this one. We can look and see what's going on here. So in the other tab, I can see that there is a PDF for this item, and I also have an alert. Here's my alert that there's a citation with a new file. I mentioned this from the task list. There's a dedicated task that takes you to all of these citations, but you can also see this information as you're working your way through reading lists. You can see those citations that have new files. What you do with this is really dependent on your library and, again, the types of things that you do for course materials. It may be that I take a look at this file and see if it really is the right pages, see if it's a good scan. Maybe half of the text is missing off of this scan. It may be that you review these things for copyright. That really is up to your library and the types of things that you do to support these course materials. I maybe just check that there is a file and set this as complete, but if you ever do need to either remove a file or replace a file, you can go into the Edit menu here. And again, down in this file upload section, here we can see the file. I have the option to either download the file or delete the file. I could delete this and I could replace it with a different file if I needed to. We'll say that this particular one is fine. So I'm going to go ahead then and just set this as complete. And here we have now two citations left, one where we're waiting for that move request to come in, and one where we're waiting for the decision on that purchase request. So at this point, we'll consider this list as done as it's going to be for now, while we're still waiting for this other work to be done. Once the list is complete, there's a couple more steps that need to happen. The last thing is that I would mark this list as complete. Leganto out of the box will actually do that automatically as the last citation is marked as complete. That will also mark the list as complete. And then the final thing that needs to happen is that the list needs to be published. Students will never be able to see a reading list until it's published. Instructors can publish lists or the library can publish lists. We usually recommend that the library take kind of a last look at this and just make sure that the list is published. We don't want to have instructors build these lists and libraries process these lists just so that students can't even see them. So as I'm finishing up this list, this is an opportunity to just check and make sure that this list is published and perhaps decide to publish it. There are several different options for how reading lists can be published, and this has to do with how they'll be visible to students. So if you need the list to be locked down only to the students who are enrolled in the course, for example, we can publish it to course students. In this case, students will need to access the list through the learning management system, or they won't be able to see this list. We can also have all students full, meaning everyone affiliated with the institution can access this reading list. Anyone full, meaning anyone anywhere, can access these reading lists. Again, there are some different options for how this can be published. We recommend that you come up with a default, how most of your lists are going to be published, and then realize that there may be exceptions for different situations. We'll say all students full for this particular list, and I'm going to go ahead and just save this. Before I do that, I do want to point out that even though the list is published, there are still two citations here that aren't actually finished. If your lists get published before they're marked as complete, students won't be able to see these resources. So if you need to wait to move this to course reserves before you share with students that this is on a reading list, you can do that. If you want to wait to make the decision about whether to purchase this item or not, you can do that. This is a configuration option that citations that haven't been marked as complete won't be visible to students, but it is the out-of-the-box configuration. So unless you change it, that will be the way that Leganto works. I'm going to go ahead and save this list. And now we are back in my reading list task list. The one that we have been working on is now assigned to me. I mentioned that that would happen automatically, so I can just wait for those last two to get finished. I could then work my way through another reading list. I want to also talk, though, about working at the citation level. So what we just did is we picked up one reading list and worked our way through all of the citations on that list, but it's also possible to work at the citation level. So I'm going to go into the task for citations that are ready for processing, and this will show us all of the citations across all of our reading lists that have that ready for processing status. This is a nice way to see the big picture of all of the different citations that need to be worked on. You can see this for different courses, different reading lists. These top two are the ones that we just worked on because I have this sorted by last modified, but we can also see that there are some other reading lists that are in this set of citations that need to be worked on as well. Working at the citation level is a really nice way to work if, rather than focusing list by list, you want to focus workflow by workflow. So for example, I could take all of these citations and I could filter to the ones that are in a particular status. Maybe I go down and look at the resource locate status here, and I can see all of the citations where it says information incomplete. These are the ones that don't have enough information to run that resource locate job. So I could start with these citations, I could look up the additional details about these citations, and I could go through and mark these as complete. There's now a new filter here which I can remove to see all of the citations. Another way to think about this is looking at all of the different alerts on a citation. So there's a number of different alerts that might display. Move request in process was one that we saw. The purchase request approved, move request completed. Maybe I go into these where the move request has been completed. These are ones where we had previously submitted a move request and now that item has arrived in our, in this case, course reserves location. We can see the details of the physical item and where it is. I could select all of these and mark them as complete in bulk, going in here to change the status and then set them as complete. I only have 3 on this list, but it's possible that we could have many more. So working at the citation level, as we see here, is a nice way to scoop up these workflows in bulk. It does depend on what works best for your library. It may be that this isn't the best way to work with course materials. You may set up a workflow where somebody goes through and assigns reading lists to particular staff members, and then as an individual staff member, I come here and I look at the citation level, but I filter to the ones that are assigned to me and I work from there. So you have some flexibility. If you are working from this citation view, you can easily link out to the reading list if you needed to see this in the context of the broader reading list. You can also link to view this citation in Leganto as well if you need to see what it looks like in the Leganto interface. So it would be the same workflow. You could do the same things that we just worked our way through for these particular resources and set them as complete as you work through them. What I recommend as you're starting to develop your library workflows is to try it both ways. Try it working at the list level and try it working at the citation level and see what works best for your library, or even, as I said, for individual users, because you could assign reading lists to yourself, but then as an individual still work at the citation level. So hopefully this session has given you an idea of what happens in Alma as instructors are doing their work in Leganto, what these reading lists or what these citations look like inside of Alma, and also the types of things that your library might do to process these citations and make them available for students.